right, and we're live.
And welcome everybody back to the Ops Show, where we bring you the trials and tribulations, automations, and collaborations on a weekly basis from the world of DevOps and the greater developer experience. Today, we're super fortunate to have Alistair Shepherd-Cross, who is the founder of TeamIt, Agile Recruiting, and a lumberjack turned techie. Well, I'm very excited to talk to you about all the things you know about career development, get your best work from home tips, and learn more about how I can get my dream developer job. Alistair, welcome. How are you doing?
I'm great, thanks. I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, you were just talking a little, why don't you just jump in, give us a little bit of your background and level us out a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So, I moved to Canada back in 1996, which is I can't believe it's that long ago. I was right. I was in forestry, so I got a job up in Prince Rupert of all places, and worked for a forestry engineering company up there, running around designing logging roads, harvesting systems, and all that kind of good stuff. And then I got tired of the lonely, remote lifestyle, I guess, and moved to Calgary and fell into IT recruitment. So, made the obvious jump, and it just fit like a glove right away. And I had to eventually admit that my parents were right all along. I should have been in sales, you hate to have to admit that, but they knew way before I did. Anyway, I've been doing it ever since. So I started my own company in 2004, Agile Recruiting. So we build tech resources and teams for software companies here in Alberta. And then in 2015, we started another company called TeamIt, which is focused around building high-performing remote teams. So it was always focused on the remote side of things. So we're a little bit ahead of the game. Now we're all working remote. I think it was a very good move to do that. And so we build teams for companies traditionally based out of the US, and we build them up here in Western Canada. And they get an opportunity to make the most of the great talent that exists up here. It gives Canadians greater opportunity. They can work from home. And we like to try and create teams of resources that have worked together before, so we sort of get the band back together, and that way it makes much more of a seamless kind of development experience for our remote clients, because all the people know each other.
So I love that. You're kind of like I follow avidly the startup L Jackson on Twitter, or it's like Samuel L. Jackson, but you're kind of like the startup, Paul Bunyan. Almost. You should probably claim that website or claim that Twitter handle right after this. That's really, so you bring up an interesting question, and I hear a lot of companies doing this. Why do that US to Canada thing? Because of the kind of the subsidization of R&D, and how does that work if that's kind of one of the strategic angles?
Well, actually, it's funny because when you talk to our friends in the south of the border, when you bring up Canada, and you give them all the reasons why it kind of makes sense, such as proximity, we're all culturally aligned, we speak the same language. It's, on average, if you want to compare, San Francisco to most of Western Canada, Vancouver's a little bit more expensive, but still there's a big difference. I mean, there's a 50% cost difference between the two countries. You've got time zone that plays into it as a huge factor. And then the security, I mean, the list goes on and on. And so when you actually come up with this stuff and talk to our friends to the south, they go, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, but it seems so obvious. But because I think Canada and US are sort of one and the same in a lot of people's minds, they never think of Canada as a place to come. They always think they've got to go to India or some far-flung place to get a great deal, when actually right on their own doorstep is one of the best options.
Yeah. I've been tracking on this for a while. Like the concept of, I've called it nearshoring for a very long time. Especially growing up as a software engineer, a lot of times, I worked at companies here in Vancouver, but then I started realizing I could consult. I would consult for companies out of the Bay Area from Vancouver, time zone aligned. So it made a lot of sense for me, even just as a contractor. It made sense for them for all the aforementioned reasons. But what I've seen more and more is like this concept is now developing into a more scalable business model. And there's things like, infrastructure being put behind it, like we'll host it in an office, and there's sort of like options packages and employee benefits associated. What do you think, like, where do you think this leads? Because it's like almost a major sort of emergence, aside from like political trends that are obviously driving this right now around H1Bs and these things, but like it was already a thing that was moving in that direction. Do you think it's just the costs, or do you think it's more a question of saturation of talent, or what's
it's
driving
not
it?
Cost is not really the driving force here. Like, cost is an added benefit. It's talent. It is simply access to great talent. And it's also certainty too, because you could argue in the States there's a lot of uncertainty with everything that's going along on with stuff we've seen recently, the H-1B visa thing. People, how welcome do minorities feel in the States? And so you look to the north and it's pretty stable up here. I mean, you don't have all those glaring question marks, but ultimately it's availability of talent. That's really what it comes down to. We talk to all our clients, and that's why they come here. But they sort of have to be. I mean, there is a bit of a the sense that the best people, live in Silicon Valley, the smartest brains live down there. And I think that's starting to get debunked, and people are realizing that actually the smart people everywhere in the world. And, and I think this whole COVID pandemic situation, all it is an accelerator of what was already going on. The technology's been there for 4 or 5 years that allows for remote work. Most companies had some kind of remote worker working with them, but they weren't 100% committed to it. And so this has forced the hand, and it's basically changed the workforce forever, because it was already set up to do that. And so here we are. We have had, and you're going to see it. I think you're going to see the same thing in online, e-commerce. A lot of people are already doing it, but this has forced the hand even more. So you're just going to get this flip over from 20% of people working remotely to now 60% of people working remotely when we come out of this. So this is the future of the workforce is going to be completely different forever.
What's interesting about this is, the natural evolution that I definitely saw was we had these sort of H1B staging areas here that kind of started to emerge, where there was almost these offices set up by large Silicon Valley companies that you went in and there's desks, but they didn't even take the shrink wrap off the monitors, right? And like they're hiring a lot of people from around the world, and those people are immigrating to Canada because of our very inclusive immigration policies, which is great. But what I see now is they're just saying, look, Canada's a great destination at the end game, because as we go to this more distributed thing, the thing that I get really unclear about within this model is how do we deal with the distributed nature of people working all around the world? Yes, you can open up to that talent, and yes, we can communicate over Zoom and Slack and work on the internet, but all of the other things, the operational stuff, pay scales, local employment standards. There's obviously a trend here where people are immigrating some of that talent to Canada to standardize around it. Are you seeing that, and how do you think that plays with the natural need to activate talent around the world?
Yeah, I think Canada it's a safe, solid place, and it's a sort of a jumping off point for the US. It's right next door. So, it just makes so much sense to make have a presence here. I think, you're seeing, we're always big advocates of remote, but not remote everywhere. So don't just have a scatterbomb approach of hiring 100 developers and having one in Saudi Arabia, one in Egypt, one here, one here. So, pick a location and build a pod, maybe, and then once you sort of, I wouldn't even say exhausted that supply, once you feel like, okay, we've got 20 people in Calgary or wherever it might be, how about looking at Kelowna or Vancouver or Victoria? So you build these pods, and that way, you have the sort of the numbers, efficiency in numbers. It's easy to get people together. It's easier to create kind of a good team dynamic. People can meet casually in shared office space or whatever it might be. And you can build your brand in that community, which is really important, because if you build your brand, then you can get access to more talent in that community, and you can get access to better talent in that community. If you just have one person in Calgary, well, you're really not able to make a real mark in any one place. So we believe in kind of building these pods.
I think that's
that's
smart.
interesting with like the diversification of it. And then do you
Yeah.
also look at, does it kind of, do you see that play into performance too, where, let's say, if you're hiring a sales team, you might hire, 2 or 4 salespeople and kind of let that natural competition bubble up. Does this give you a better benchmark on what markets actually have, a higher level of developer talent?
I guess you could. I mean, you can just measure them against each other. I mean, I think the big thing is actually retention. It's the one thing people don't really talk about that much. I mean, people always talk about attraction, but you're better off not attracting 5 developers than hiring 5 developers that leave within 8 months.
Yeah.
So the attraction, the attrition or retention piece, I think is actually almost the most important part of the hiring process. So you can find cities and communities where the people that you hire stay. I think that's huge. So, we're always pushing that, which is why, we've encouraged our clients to look at the non-traditional tech markets. I mean, you've seen that in Minnesota because a lot of California companies are hiring in the Midwestern states. Now there's only a certain
or even opening offices. Yeah, just doing I've seen the same thing, like say a company like BetterUp as a pod of talent in Minneapolis. And
exactly.
Yeah, I think we see that happen in the US and abroad.
Yeah, so we do the same thing using, let's say, tier 2 cities. I mean, Calgary would be one, Winnipeg's one, Edmonton's one. Well, that's a tier 3 city, so I'm just joking.
Do you ever recruit internationally to relocate? Because I've seen that be one of the things that really helps, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think when we were literally just talking to a client this morning about that very question, because if you're looking to grow your office significantly, you can't look at one particular market as being able to find all that talent from within.
Yeah.
So then you go, okay, well, if we're going to bring people from other places across Canada or internationally, they've got to find this location desirable. Like, it's got to be affordable. It's got to have an attraction that's not only going to attract people there, but more importantly, I mean, if you hire someone from overseas, the chances are they'll come wherever you tell them to come. But then if it's Winnipeg in the winter, that might not be ideal for them. So maybe Victoria is a great option because it's a nice climate and a great place to live. Calgary, I mean, I'm biased, but I think it's great. And it's affordable. That's the big thing. So you can get ahead and buy a place in Calgary pretty cheaply for a whole bunch of reasons. So those are all factors when you want to look at bringing people in from overseas.
Yeah,
well. So,
I think that's one of the things that I'm seeing is actually becoming more of both an attraction and a retention mechanism. So we have this really great success story about one of our platform engineers, Danilo. Danilo Kaltner is a senior software engineer with us, and he relocated from Brazil to here in Canada. He wanted to move to Canada, so that was a reason for him to seek us out. But it was also a situation where obviously you move across the world, you're very invested into whatever you're going to do, your immigration.
That's a big commitment.
It's a big commitment, right? And so it's been really successful from that. And we didn't approach this from the perspective of like, we're looking to hire hundreds of engineers. And I know that there's companies here in Canada that have definitely done that. But we were just saying like, look, we want to find people who have that level of commitment and, are willing to put that in, and we're going to put that into them. And if we can also relocate them to Canada, then it also helps us get access to talent that wouldn't otherwise be found in this current market, like in our local market.
Right. And it's funny because we actually did the same thing. We hired 2 software developers from Brazil.
Yeah.
And we brought them in on the global talent stream, and
Exactly.
they're just awesome.
Amazing.
And and everyone goes, why would somebody from Brazil want to come to Calgary? And they arrived in December, and it was a blizzard, and it was minus 21 or something crazy. And I'm just thinking, oh my God. But they were like, wow, look at the snow. This is the coolest thing. Yeah. Snow wears off pretty quick, to be honest. When I was talking to them, they go, look, when weather is the one concern you have about whether this is going to be a good city to live in, you really don't have anything to complain about. Security, corruption, opportunity, education, all those things, they weigh way more heavily on people that come from overseas than the than the weather of Calgary. So so anyway, they love it here, and they're embracing everything there is, and they want to sign up for their PRs down the road.
It's one of the most Canadian things we can do. It's just like open up that global talent stream. You can even get, I've been told, and we've been able to even get approved in as little as 2 weeks for people who we haven't even hired yet. So there's like parts of this program, I mean, you probably know it better than I do, but as I understand it, you can actually get approved, as long as you have a job description, you can get approved in advance of even hiring somebody for that role, for some number of roles that are qualifying under the GTS.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually amazingly efficient. I mean, I never thought I'd have a government agent hounding me to get the paperwork in. So,
yeah, that's quite the turn of events.
It is, yeah. So what about when you look at the, we kind of hinted on it a little bit, but do you see, a talent exhaustion sometimes in a certain area for a certain role? And I think a lot of times we hear this, and it's been wild to see what COVID is and how that's changed people's philosophies. But let's say VCs in San Francisco will say, hey, you want to build a big company, move to San Francisco. But now, like you said, maybe 40% more people are working abroad and or working online and remotely, and so that distributed network becomes more easy. Now, that said, there still might be certain caps to talent in certain regions, especially if there are larger players. And one of the examples we were talking about right before we went live was Shopify, and kind of launching out of a smaller area. Talk a little bit about that and that talent exhaustion gap that can happen, as well as what does that look like from a big, large unicorn company kind of proving VCs in San Francisco wrong. Right. Well, I mean, there's no doubt that. In Vancouver, for example, you've got all the guys are moving in. You got Amazon. You've got Google's there, I believe. You name it. Microsoft's got a huge office. So, they soak it up pretty quickly. It doesn't take long for the talent to get. And I would argue that really good talent is in short supply in every North American city. No matter where you go, there's nowhere where a great Ruby on Rails developer is just sitting there twiddling their thumbs waiting for a call, unless they're choosing to. It is literally, there's a global shortage. There's still a global shortage. I don't see that changing. So the bigger question is, well, how do you attract these people? How do you make yourself different? How do you get access? How do you come up with creative kind of creative hiring solutions and creative attraction techniques? At the end of the day, it really comes down to, I've just got a really, really cool company that does really cool things. And things that matter, things that really resonate with people. That's how you attract people, ultimately. You can try all these other things, but that's the best way, ultimately. It's interesting with Shopify. I don't know if, I'm sure some of you have heard that they are now going to, I think, or what's that terming default, digital by default, which essentially means that even they're basically reimagining the workplace moving forward. So, they've got these beautiful offices out east, and they're really looking to, even though they are committed to this space, they want to try and create a digital communication standard even for people in the office, because the hybrid model scares them. The idea that you've got half the company working remotely, half the company in an office, the sidebar conversations that happen to people in the office, the people working remotely are not included. And that's just not a positive situation at all. So they're trying to create, like every meeting in the office is going to kind of be a Zoom style meeting. So, and that everything is done digitally, even when you're face to face with somebody. That is fascinating, really, when you think about it. But to me, it makes a lot of sense. Again, we had conversations earlier this week with companies that are really freaked out about the hybrid model. As companies are starting to go back, it was almost easier when everybody was remote. The playing field was the same. Now, people are starting to think about going back. Well, how the hell do you do that? There's just so many challenges around communication and inclusion. Yeah, so it's fascinating. So I think, companies that are embracing this, like Shopify, and really trying to reimagine what the workplace looks like, I think are the ones that are going to win the race.
Yeah, we put a lot of research into this over the last few years. Like, we've thought a lot about it. We were very much a co-located company, all in the same physical office space. Then we became a bit of a hybrid, and now we're fully remote, where people do go into a shared office space at times, but they take the approach of like acting like they're contributing from home, and they're viewing it from home. They're just reaping the benefits. And in my research, my experience with trying all of these approaches, they rank, either take your pick for number one. It's either you're co-located or you're remote, but your hybrid is definitely the one that is the hardest, and I think the least beneficial, because it creates this dual class citizenship within any team that just breaks it down, where you're out of the loop and communication doesn't flow. So I think what we're really going to get clarity on is, you kind of have to be intentional. And if you're going to go with hybrid, you're at a disadvantage right out of the gate. So it's cool to see them trying to overcome that, because I don't think hybrid is avoidable now. I think it has to be a thing where the majority of companies are going to fall into that hybrid scenario. And it's beyond telecommuting at this point. It is more of a remote-led transition. What do you think are like some of the major things on the employee side when they're looking for companies that they should be thinking about, whether it's how these companies are working in this new era, the comp packages, or any of the other benefits that might be part of that attraction? I'd love to just hear, like, as far as an advocacy for the job seeker, what do you think are the most important things for them to think through?
Well, I coming back to this remote thing, I think they want to work for companies that have a really progressive remote hiring or remote work strategy, and that they're completely committed to that, because it's super hard to manage, as you say, the kind of hybrid scenario. When it comes to salaries, I mean, this idea that if you, hang on a second.
Hey, Siri.
As soon as you hit that S word.
Yeah, I know. I'm going to turn my phone off. As soon as, they're talking about, if you live in certain parts of a city, if you live in the suburbs, your salary's lower versus, if you live downtown. And, that's been going on for a while. There's a number of companies that have been building kind of with these types of salary structures. But for the majority, that's something completely new. And, I would say that a lot of remote people have kind of worked and really, I don't know, but unfairly benefited from being able to live in like a small town and get paid the same amount as somebody in San Francisco. To me, that doesn't make a lot of sense, and that there needs to be some kind of normalizing of that, because now it is beginning to become the new normal. You're not just kind of a unique, one of the 10% that's doing that. You're going to be like the whole company's going to be doing it, or 60% of the company's going to be doing it. So suddenly it has a major impact, and so I think people are going to have to start to get comfortable with those kind of scenarios, that remote is just the norm, and that they're really no different to the majority of their employers. They're not a special case. But I think, I'm not sure that really totally answers your question, but I also, the opportunity now is infinite for a developer. And to be honest, it kind of has been for a while, that just by nature, only a certain number of people will really jump on that kind of remote bandwagon and start feeling comfortable working remotely. But now that it's becoming the new normal, I mean, the opportunities for people to find the things they really want are huge. So you really can hold out for the right job and the kind of the niche area that you really want to play in, rather than going, God, it'd be so great if there was a job like this in Vancouver or Calgary. They just don't really exist. It's like, you don't have to worry about that now. They exist. You can do them from anywhere. So I think that's a mindset shift for people, that they can really get to work on what they really want to. And I would argue that there's a lot of people who work on things that they don't really enjoy working on, but it's the best they could find. Given their personal situation, they can't move because they got kids and school, and they're committed. And particularly as you get more mature in your in work, and how, in the work journey, it's harder to move. You got more responsibilities, so you feel like you're committed to a specific area more and more and locked in.
I'd love to drill into that more because there's just so much, especially around like geographically, distributed salary kind of adjustments and these kinds of things like cost of living.
Sure.
One of the things that I think has been really obvious for us here in Vancouver as a result of the real estate market is definitely that people were working here. They're working for Vancouver companies. Vancouver companies had to be more flexible in realizing that when people hit a certain point of their life, settling down with kids, they may be more inclined to move to Kelowna or might be more inclined to move to Vancouver Island or even Calgary, right? And if you want to retain that talent, you have to look at it through the lens of like, yes, like how do I enable you to still be successful in your life while working at this company? And I think that's an easier conversation to have when somebody's starting and at the beginning and they're recruiting into a new company and you're sort of setting this up for success where you're like, okay, you're living there. But when people leave a city to move to a lower cost center, it's a more challenging conversation, right? And I think one of the places we saw this really recently, and we kind of touched on earlier, was Facebook made this big announcement recently about, and I think all Silicon Valley companies are kind of looking at this, is there is this big influx of people who are moving on from that high cost center of maybe San Francisco or the Bay Area into other places. What do you think that looks like? Do you what do you know? I haven't really paid much attention. I just saw that Mark Zucker make some announcement on that subject, which seems like it's going to set some precedent for what it means.
Oh, sure. I mean,
for people. Definitely.
I mean, I think. Again, all this stuff has been going on, for years. People leaving the big city to go and work in, like we in a smaller center. Like I've got, we have 3 developers that live in Nelson, and they work for a San Francisco tech company, and they get paid. Well, they get paid. I think the key with paying is you don't want to pay them stupid money, like, and they live in Nelson, but you want to pay them more than what they would typically make in Nelson. So, someone locally isn't going to come and snatch them up.
But they were hired. Were they hired in Nelson, to be fair? Like, I mean, that's to me seems like the obvious scenario, well aligned with your business model. And like, it makes sense hiring this team in Nelson, understand the market. I mean, the big difference here is the influx of people who are now hired in these major metropolitans and are now, while still employed, changing the scenario.
Well, so one of them was hired in Calgary, and then he moved to Nelson.
Oh, okay.
And so he still gets the same salary. So the idea would be, okay, well, you need to make 140K. Now you're going to Nelson. We're going to knock that down to 115. So that. But the flip side is, well, what happens if you hire someone in Vancouver or Victoria, and then they go to Toronto? Okay, well, I want more now. I mean, it can go either way. So it's not, I think, so this stuff has been going for quite a while.
It brings up an interesting transparency question of like, will people, one, you have to kind of level the market. So if there are some companies that aren't leveling for geography, then that means you almost need to still be competitive enough, and if on a remote distributed level salary, so that if you are adjusting for it. And then also as a employee, do I want to share where I'm living if I know that I'm gonna like take a huge
or more
drop in salary?
You
right.
Move every
or
You just do that, doing in the RV or just moving from. Today you need to pay me this because I'm actually in Toronto.
You must have heard the stories of the people who live in buses in like the Google parking lots and stuff, or slept in
exactly.
Like
Walmart. The free parking lots
I
at
think
Walmart.
people have done this in Silicon Valley for a long time. Even like they'll work at Google and they just Google has all the facilities, so they just kind of live there, right?
I mean, the way I look at it is that if everybody's doing this, eventually the prices are just going to keep going up because, so many people are living in, Kelowna, and other companies going, well, to compete with the Kelowna talent that's all working remote, we need to pay this, and so the number just keeps going up anyway. That's just driven by competition.
Yeah, well then that's good, right? It's this distributed releveling of geographies, especially at least in North America, where these smaller markets are now going to, bear the benefit of major players who had experience in, major markets coming in, and maybe they work there for their Silicon Valley company, and then they start their own, and then they hire people to train. I mean, to me, this is the sort of trickle down economics effect, which I think is really positive. So I hope to not see it get too, I guess, managed and socialized. And like, as much as I like the transparency, and I know that there's companies that have these frameworks of like, here's how we do salary calculations, so everybody knows it's fair, and here's how we do it. I do think that there's just a nice free market element of this, of like, let the talent go where it needs to go, pay for quality output, not to manage how people live their lives, and then there'll be this trickle down effect where, like, I know Kelowna in particular, that's an example we come back to. I was out there for MetaBridge last year, and it's turning into a real tech hub. Like, there's real companies being built there, and that's a result of this trickle out effect where talent is moving on from the major I mean, this is good. It's a rising tide,
Like a lot of the success at Kelowna is built around Disney, and that was probably 5-6 years ago, maybe longer. And a lot of those folks have then since started up their own companies, and it's created that critical mass. But yeah, Kelowna's got a great vibe. It really has.
I love it. It's warm. There's nice lakes.
Yeah, it's nice. Yeah. Actually, there was one thing I was going to mention earlier about the whole thing around coming to Canada and sort of the VC market, because one thing we're seeing changing is that the VCs now are actually, we're starting to hear them sort of say, if you don't have a remote hiring policy, then that's a risk for us as an investment, as an investor. So we want to see companies no longer, you got to build your team in San Francisco, for example, and start there. It's like, well, no, I mean, we want to see you. Sure, it makes sense to have a few people down there. Maybe just that's where the ideas are and that's where the money is. But if you don't have a remote hiring policy, that's a major risk in our eyes. So that's super refreshing, because they have a massive impact on what the decisions of their portfolio companies are as to where they build their teams. So,
big trickle down effect there. I mean, Tristan and I probably both know a few people, and I'm sure you do too, where they have a VC whose hiring criteria is, can I put my Tesla into driverless mode and get to you in the Bay Area within an hour while I'm tweeting along the way? Like, that's kind of like, the incentive, and that trickle down effect is pretty limiting for the companies, the employees, and the progression overall. So I definitely have seen that change as well. And I think I'm also seeing a lot more of these VCs willing to get on a plane and come to Canada, because they're now realizing that they have to look in other places for their business model to work. Their business model is contrarian and true, and talent doesn't really only exist in one area. It can be, you can have a really powerful talent base in somewhere like Kelowna, but if you don't get on that plane, you'll never see it. But the local angels will.
Right. It's funny. We had one of our clients. They flew up here last year, and they brought a bunch of team members with them. And the director of development, who's funny enough, his sister lives here, bizarrely. So he was very familiar with Calgary. He said the first thing they said when we touched down was, "Wow, we're here already," because they think that Calgary's sort of way north. It's a 2-hour flight.
I do day trips to the Bay Area. Like I
know. It's like right there.
I go down in the morning and come back at night and still get to put my kid to bed. Like it's such a short flight that there's very little reason not to be open to it, I think.
Yeah. So so I think when it comes to the developers and opportunities, and this totally plays into their hands. It gives everybody more choice, and I think a key piece of the puzzle now is that, as I said, the clients, the companies that you work with, are really committed to the remote experience, and that they're prepared to spend the time, put the effort in, the money to create a great experience. Like, companies like Automatic, I mean, they've been doing this for years. Their entire company's remote. They have big get-togethers every quarter. They invest in all the best technology, all the best communication tools. And in some respects, if you start remote, it's so much easier to build great remote experiences. But when you aren't remote and then you start like now playing catch up, you kind of have these two camps, the new remote people and the old guard. And so how do you integrate them? It's not easy.
It becomes a real culture question, right? Like
it's huge. Yeah.
Pretty essential.
But as long as the desire and the commitment is there from the leadership teams, then they'll be able to overcome those. I mean, one thing we're doing is we've actually partnered with a company out of Calgary called Work Evolution, and it's all based out of data and research from the University of Calgary over the last 15 years, which is, so they built these tools that focus on leadership capability and team capability and individual contributor capability around remote work. So they were way ahead of their time building all this stuff. So you can actually assess your leadership team for their remote readiness. And that sort of thing I think is really important, because before you start building a bunch of remote teams, you need to and remote offices, you need to make sure that your own internal team is actually able to lead and manage that, because otherwise you won't realize the success of it. And so I think critically looking at what you have internally first and assessing that team for this new landscape is super important.
Yeah, and it's a transition. I think one of the biggest transitions I've seen in sentiment here, you kind of mentioned the old guard versus the new guard remote. And one of the things I saw a lot in hiring from engineers before all of this was there were certain advocates of remote who were very, very vocal about remote's the only way to work. I'll never work at a company that isn't remote, and that's all fine and good. But they were, I would say they were the vocal minority out there in most of the places. And I'd even find in some hiring conversations, recruiting conversations, that you'd get very, junior people with not much experience who would just say, hey, look, like, I'm not willing to work anywhere where I can't be on a beach. And there used to be sort of this like, okay, well, I don't know how I can accommodate that really at the moment. But what's shifted now is that it's no longer the vocal minority. It's now the mainstream. And I've actually seen that there's almost like a vocal minority emerging around co-located companies and the benefits of working in offices. And even within our own team, I think we were surprised to find that there were very specific people who, or not very specific, but there were definitely plenty of people who were like, remote's not for me. And like, that was completely okay. Do you see it rebalancing the other way as far as like, what does it mean to reevaluate an office? Is open offices the right offices? Are you seeing those same kinds of investments on the company side? And like, how are the people that you're helping to find these jobs, like, how are they thinking about it? I know you're more focused on the remote side of things, but I mean, there's some certain threshold where co-location density means that maybe there is a real definite benefit of like the co-located style of this.
Right. So, this is all we sort of yet to be determined. I mean, I think we're going to see a massive development in business processes, tools, collaboration tools, flooding the market over the next 12 months as, we kind of grapple with this new reality. And people are going to get more comfortable with the digital experience. But the workplace isn't going to disappear like as we know it. The physical space, I mean, the human contact is important, but it can't be kind of an ad hoc process, because then you kind of run to this hybrid situation, which I think we all agree is super challenging. So it has to be very kind of, by design. People go into the office, it's organized. It's not just, oh, well, I'm going to go into the office today, but in the next 4 days I'm working remotely. Like, you go in for specific reasons as a group. So there maybe the office is more of a place where it's for collaboration, ideation around specific kind of parts of a project, maybe a meeting with a client, whatever, that kind of stuff. But the actual work is done at home or remotely, so that the office becomes more of a socializing place and a collaboration place, and it's it's by design rather than sort of kind of the people always talk about, oh, I missed the water cooler conversation. But the water cooler conversation is great, but it's also a dangerous conversation. It can be, because it's creative, it's spontaneous, but then other people are kept out of the loop. That's where a lot of the politics goes on around, if you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. So there's lots of different ways of looking at it, but I think it's yet to be determined. So we're kind of guessing a little bit, but I really, when I look at our situation, we're going to use the office. We're all going to go in on one particular day, and we're going to use it for specific tasks, and then the rest of the time we're going to do it from home.
There was an interesting thought that somebody shared with us on our team. I can't remember who or when, but when we were reviewing this, and they said, you know what, rather than have like a work from home day, why don't we have a work from office day?
Yeah, exactly.
Work from work.
Well, yeah.
Prediction. Does this mean the end of the office as we know it, though? Is this a push towards shared or on-demand, co-location? Sure. Do you think? Like, is that the rise, the reinvention of WeWork is now going to be around kind of like the meeting room?
Yeah, I mean, I like we're already talking about our office. If we only use it one day a week, we actually own the space. So we're talking about, how could we share it with the companies that we're helping build offices for in Calgary that are remote. So maybe we get it on a Monday, they use it on a Tuesday, Wednesday. Somebody else uses it on a Thursday, Friday. So it's basically shared office space, but it's yours for that time. Yeah. So I think, who knows? I mean, the office situation in Calgary is so dire that this is just kind of, I can't imagine what it's going to, I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with what's going on in Calgary.
I spent a little bit of time looking at it. I mean, there's a huge huge amount of commercial real estate available, correct? But
it's
no
like
parking, no parking, but tons of commercial
real estate.
No parking.
Yeah, most expensive parking in North America, outside of New York or something stupid, but it's come down a bit. But yeah, so I don't know what it means for a city like ours from a real estate perspective. I mean, people are legitimately concerned and scratching their heads about. But who really wants to drive into a big downtown office and tower and sit in traffic for 2 hours? And
I like what you said about social, like the social piece, because we saw this a little bit in San Francisco as we were down there, and you sort of have the WeWorks and the WorkWises, which are more like office, right? But like closets. But now there's more of like the members club, which is more about social, and it hasn't really breached into the idea fully of like this is for companies, but they're sort of toying with that idea a little bit. And that's because of the concentration of VC and founders that sort of go there to socialize, where there was at least one or two that I saw pop up, which I can't remember the names of, but they were actually saying, look, this is a place where you can come with your team and socialize and maybe do a session, and there's sort of meeting rooms that you can book, but then this big kind of a much bigger shared area than you would see normally. And it's more like a membership subscription. And I think that like that is probably an interesting thread of what we can anticipate, because it is more that archetype of like, let's meet up once a quarter, once a week to get that FaceTime, have that water cooler time, I guess, as a group. And it's interesting to think how the commercial side of real estate is going to change as a result.
Oh yeah. Like, I mean, everything that's going on is going to be such a monumental shift that, and in a very short period of time, it's going to be fascinating to see how this all pans out in the end. But I mean, I'm excited, really. I like working from home. I find I work more efficiently. Being a remote placement company, our team was not actually remote ourselves. So now we're actually
cool.
So we're now actually having to like, yeah, exactly, yeah, and we all love it. We've had a few teething problems here and there, but. I mean, our business is well set up for it, so it's relatively easy to do it. But I love it. What's that?
I hear the chimes of meetings coming up. Alistair, I think this is let's ship it. Great conversation. Thanks for coming on. Any last words, and where can we find you online?
Yeah, well, you want to look up company www.teamit.com and TEAMIT. Really enjoyed the conversation, and yeah, we'll keep in touch.
Yeah,
great
to have you.
Take us out, Kyle. Yeah, great combo.